Chapter 6 of Winning His Way by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6, in which Elsie Gray, Mr. Dabbleton, an advance agent, and Judge Smith enliven the Argus office.
"Frank Morris, I'm ever so glad to see you," cried Elsie Gray, turning toward the young editor with her daintily gloved hands extended as soon as Duncan Roach had withdrawn.
"No more than I to see you, Miss Elsie," said Frank, grasping both her hands with an eager movement that brought a slight flush to her charming face. "Come inside the railing and take a seat." Elsie Gray was undeniably a lovely girl. Sylph-like and petite of form, she was gracefulness itself. A wealth of shining brown hair escaped from a bewitching sort of gypsy hat, which sat coquettishly upon her shapely head, and her smile? Frank Morris thought it something beyond the power of pen to describe, and he was not such a bad descriptive writer himself.
"I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mr. Morris," she said with a roguish smile. "If I am, just give me a hint, and I will relieve you of my presence. If there is anything that I detest myself, it is a bore, you know."
"I assure you that you're not incommoding me in the least, while your presence in this office I might compare to a ray of sunshine, if I wish to be poetical," he said gallantly.
"How nice of you to say it, sir," laughed Elsie. "Really, I shall begin to believe Father was right when he said you were the coming editor of Green River."
"Did your father really say that?" asked Frank, surprised.
"He said that this morning at the breakfast table when he opened his copy of the Argus, saw your name for the first time as editor, in place of Amos Jebb, and read what he called your very able editorial on the Republican prospects for 1905.
"I'm very much obliged to your father for the compliment, but I fear he flatters me. It'll be time enough for all that, you know, when I have demonstrated what I really can do."
"Straws show the way the wind blows. I'm quoting my father, mind you, and your first political article shows your most encouraging promise, not only as regards yourself, but with reference to the Republican cause in Green River, which my father, thanks to the able efforts of the late Mr. Morris, represents in the state legislature."
"You would make a bad campaign orator, Miss Elsie," smiled Frank.
"Do you really think so? Surely you're teasing me."
"I wouldn't be guilty of teasing you, Miss Elsie," said Frank, going on with his work in such a way as to still hold her attention and entertain her.
"This isn't where you do your writing, is it?" she asked, looking around the plainly furnished outer office.
"Oh, no, not as a rule. Yonder is my sanctum, to which it will give me great pleasure to introduce you as soon as I shall have completed this little bit of routine work dealing with the practical part of the establishment."
"I suppose now that you have taken charge of the Argus, you will be a very busy boy henceforth, and I must not expect to see as much of you as usual."
"I certainly expect to have but very little time on my hands, for a while to come at any rate. But I hope you'll drop in here often and talk to me, for I feel as if your presence will be something of an inspiration toward better work."
"Really, now I ought to feel flattered at that,"
and the little miss rose and dropped the young editor a most charming curtsy. Hardly had she sat down again when the street door was darkened by a dapper-looking man dressed in a loud vest, across which hung a very heavy gold chain. "I should like to see the editor of the Argus," he said in a businesslike tone. "I'm the editor," said Frank, rising from his chair and coming to the rail. The visitor favored him with a comprehensive glance from head to foot, and then handed him a card, which read, "Dionysius Dabbleton, Advance Agent, on the Blink combination." "Will you step into the inner office, Mr. Dabbleton?" said Frank. "Excuse me a few minutes, Miss Elsie." The girl bowed, and the boy editor piloted his visitor into his sanctum. "Has the paper changed hands, or are you a relative of the party who conducted the Argus last fall when I was in town with the dancing whirligigs?" asked the theatrical agent when he had taken his seat. "I am Mr. Morris's son. He is dead only a very short time," replied Frank. "Sorry to hear of your bereavement. Nice gentleman, as I remember him. And now I want this advertisement inserted in your next paper, together with this quarter-column reading notice. I will give you an order on the treasurer of the company for the bill, which you will present after 9 o'clock at the box office on the night of the show, that is next Thursday. Here are 4 tickets, and remember we expect a first-class notice. Send proofs of the advertisement to me at the Neptune House before 2 o'clock this afternoon, and 2 copies of your paper under personal cover to Ridgeville. I will not use the Times this trip, as that fellow Bentley did me dirt when I was ahead of the whirligigs, and no man rubs it into me twice if I know it. I'm going over to the Record now, which comes out on Thursday, I believe. My paper will be out Monday. We have a 12-sheet stand that's a honey cooler, and the lithos of On the Blink are the finest going. Miss Patty Atherton, our star soubrette, was lately robbed of 9 solitaire diamond rings presented by various friends since we opened in Jayville this spring. Don't forget to spread yourself on these little facts when you write your notice. I won't overlook it when I'm around this fall again." Mr. Dabbleton was clearly a man of action, for as soon as he had finished his business with the Argus, he was on the move again. "Don't smoke, eh?" he said as Frank declined a cigar. "Well, hand it to your foreman or whoever smokes about your place. Good day, and don't forget those proofs by not later than 2 sharp." With a quick nod, he passed rapidly out on the main street. "That was a theatrical advance agent, the man ahead of the show," explained Frank to Miss Elsie. "The company will strike town sometime Thursday." The boy went into the composing room and handed the theatrical advertisements to Dan. "Proof wanted by 2 o'clock sharp. Don't fail. Send Billy with him up to the Neptune House. Here's the man's card. And, by the way, run off 100 of these visiting cards sometime this afternoon." And Frank handed Dan the copy for Duncan Roach's little job. Perhaps Harwood was not surprised at the order. Elsie Gray spent a quarter of an hour in Frank's private office, and then left to do some shopping, promising to drop in again at an early day. She had not been gone over 5 minutes when Judge Smith, chairman of the Republican County Committee, came in, and the young editor ushered his distinguished visitor into his sanctum. "Young man," said Judge Smith in his genial way, "I see you have taken charge of the Argus." "Yes, sir. A radical change was necessary if we hope to keep the paper in the family. I have put my shoulder to the wheel, and I mean to do my utmost to bring the Argus up to its former standing in Green River. Judging by your first leader, which I assume is from your pen, since nothing so vigorous and to the point has appeared in the paper since your father was forced to retire from its conduct, I may say that you have once more brought the Argus in line with the real sentiments of the Republican party. This is encouraging, and will certainly redound to your advantage. The policy persisted in by Mr. Jebb, your father's editor, was simply suicidal, and I regret to say it was always my belief that it was inspired by someone whose object was not only to ruin the Argus, but to seriously cripple the prospects of the Republican Party in this town. The conversation I had with you on a previous occasion leads me to believe that we can rely on you, as we always could on your father. Now, as you are young and inexperienced in politics, though I am bound to say your editorial shows great promise, it will give me pleasure to act as your political adviser, particularly later on, when the real work of the campaign begins. I will be glad to meet you, either at my home or at my office, at any time." "Thank you, Judge Smith. I'll be pleased to avail myself of your invitation. I understand the responsibilities I have assumed, and it is my wish to acquit myself in such a way as will best satisfy the wishes of the community, at least that part of it to whom the Argus must look for support. I'm only a boy, it is true, but I mean to do a man's part, even before I attain my majority." "I'm glad to hear you talk this way, Frank Morris, for it shows the stuff of which you are made. You are very like your father, and had he lived, I am satisfied he would have lifted the Argus to a high pinnacle of prosperity. Though the Argus has undoubtedly gone downhill during the last 6 months, and has lost the confidence of the Republican voters of Green River, still, that is no reason why you may not recover lost ground. Your father's policy was successful. Follow that, and improve upon it if you are able, and success is pretty certain to come to you." "Thank you, sir. While I am in control of the Argus, I mean it shall never disgrace the name of Morris." "Spoken like a man, Frank," said the judge, rising and slapping the boy encouragingly on the back. "I am satisfied that you will make your mark in time. I can see that you have your full share of the grit and perseverance which land the American boy on the top of the heap. I wish you every success in your efforts as a young editor and newspaper man, and will watch your progress with satisfaction. Goodbye." And Judge Smith shook hands with Frank and passed out into the street. At 2 o'clock the proof of the theatrical advertisement was passed upon by Mr. Dabbleton, and the type was locked in the form for printing. When Frank presented his bill, it was promptly paid. End of Chapter 6.